Hello and welcome to Nithrania YouTube channel. You're watching another episode of the Game in a Nutshell series designed for explaining the board game rules. My name is Branislav Berec and in this video we're going to learn how to play Horseless Carriage from Lotterspielen. First, each player chooses one of the available industrialists in the game, then take the corresponding brand pieces, deck of cards, 3 dealership stations, 4 marketing departments and these market windows, and 1 large starting factory floor tile, which is this big black board. Then place the game board on the table and place these specification axis markers like this on both the horizontal and the vertical line, so that both axes read 0, 1, 2 and 3 pips. Then shuffle these 5 research tracks and randomly choose one and place it next to this horizontal axis and the other one next to the vertical axis and the remaining 3 ones next to the board in a random order. On these 2 research tracks, which are placed next to the market board, place 1 brand marker of each player on this first technology station, so it's essentially the second space on that track, and place this wooden minimum specification marker between the first space and the second space. However, on these research tracks, which are placed off board, place 1 brand marker of each player on the starting space of each track, and again place the minimum specification indicator between the first space and the second space on the track. Place this obsolescence marker so that it points to the research track at the bottom of the market board. Then 1 brand marker of each player is placed in this first space of the assembly capacity track and 2 brand markers of each player in this 0 space of the wealth accumulation track. And then randomly determine the starting player order. Then the player who is the last in the player order gains 1 planning point and places their marker on the first space of this planning track. Then the next player receives 2 planning points and continue like this until you place the markers of all players on this planning track. Then take this time card marker and place it on this punch clock track on the starting position based on the number of players in the game. We have 3 players, we have 3 dots on this space, so this is the starting space for a 3-player game. This space with 4 dots would be the starting space for the 4-player game, and this would be the starting space for the 5-player game. Then give each player 1 research department and 1 planning department. You must place these departments in your factory now. The factory tile has a pre-printed floor plan grid, and when placing the departments in your factory, you must line those tiles with that floor plan grid, and you must place these tiles so that they fully fit into the factory. They may not be placed like this. Then you must place them on the black space. You may never cover any of this area with the dark hatching. And obviously you may never overlap any departments. And when you place any department, it must be either adjacent to this dark hatching area, which is called a loading bay, or it must be adjacent to any other tile which is already adjacent to that loading bay. You can rotate these tiles any way you want, and basically that's it. There are no other specific requirements for placing these tiles. Then for each player in the game, prepare 6 expansion floor tiles and you can put the remaining tiles back to the box. And now sort all these technology tiles by their type. And note, there are some smaller stacks and the larger stacks. And the full number of these components is designed for a 5-player game. If you have fewer players in the game, for each missing player, you have to remove 1 tile from the smaller stacks and 2 tiles from these larger stacks. So, for example, in a 4-player game, from this group of tiles with the letter B, you would take out 1 tile from each of these 4 stacks and 2 tiles from this bigger stack. So this is how it looks like for a 3-player game. By the way, if this is your first time playing Horseless Carriage, the game designers also recommend to completely remove these sports cars and trucks from the game, even if you are experienced players. the stacks of these research departments and the planning departments are much bigger. From these, you need to remove 5 research departments and 6 planning departments for each missing player. And finally, shuffle this deck of neutral cards and randomly draw 4 of them, and place the corresponding card, which represents a buyer, in the matching space of this first quadrant. You can then take those neutral cards and shuffle them back with all the remaining neutral cards, and as the last step, place this $6 price point marker in this segment of the market board. This rule is actually missing in the rulebook in the first version of the game, but it is confirmed with the designers of the game. In Horseless Carriage, players are car manufacturers producing cars in their factories and then selling them to the customers on this market board. This virtual market board shows the customers by segments. This segment has the customers with highest demand, highest requirements on the cars, and the lowest segment has the customers with lowest requirements on the car specifications. That means the customers in the top right corner are willing to pay the highest price, the customers in the lowest segment are willing to pay the least amount of money. The game is played in rounds and each round has 8 phases. In the first phase, players will perform research on these research tracks. In the second phase, they will spend these planning points to change the player order for the remainder of the round. In the third phase, players will build or extend their factories. In the fourth phase, you will determine the specification of your cars that you manufacture. Then in the fifth phase, you will sell the cars to the market based on the demands and requirements for that particular round. Then in phase 6, you will check for the end of the game. And if the game has not finished yet, in phase 7, these requirements will change, so the customers' demands are changing. And in phase number 8, new customers will be added to the market board. The game ends when this time marker reaches 0 or at the end of round 7, and the player with the most money at the end of the game is the winner. So the first phase of each round is the research phase. In this phase, players will perform research based on the number of these research departments in their factories. The order of play is determined by this track. The player with the highest engineering focus goes first, so in this case the purple player. And on your turn, for each research department in your factory, you must choose one of the following 2 options. You may either move your own research marker 1 step forward on this assembly capacity track, or instead of that, you may move any research marker of any player on any of these research tracks 1 step forward. So that means you can also move the research marker of another player. Why would you do that? I will explain that in phase 3, building your factory. At the start of the game, you only have 1 research department in your factory, but later in the game, when you have more research departments, for each department, you may choose any of those 2 options. However, you may never move the same research marker twice on the same turn. But if someone else moved the research marker in their turn, then you, on your turn, can move the same research marker again, but only 1 space. If any research marker reaches the space with this punch clock icon, move the time card marker 1 step down. That applies to any research marker, so if the purple player would reach the same space, again, you would move the time card marker 1 step down. One player must fully perform all their research steps before the next player, and once all players are done, the research phase is over. Then in the second phase, players determine the player order for the remainder of the round. The order of play in this phase is determined by these planning points. They are called Gantt chart points, with the player with the most planning points going first, the player with the fewest points goes last. In case of a tie, the player with the higher engineering focus goes first, meaning the player closer to this end of this track. Now, on your turn, you have 2 options. You can either spend all your planning points and move your marker to the 0 space, and then move your marker to any position on this track, so you can choose your order for the remainder of the round. Or the second option is to pass, keep your planning points for the next round, and do nothing. Then it's the next player's turn who has the same options, so either passing or spending all the planning points and choosing any position on the track, and continue like this with all the remaining players. You may never choose the spaces which are not active for your player count, so in a 3-player game you can only choose spaces 1, 2 and 3. And when all players are done and there are still some markers in this bottom track, keep their relative order and move them to the top track. In the third phase, players will build their factories, and this is one of the most important parts of the game. All players may perform this phase simultaneously, but in case the player order matters, the player with a higher engineering focus always has a priority. So, when building or expanding your factory, you have almost a complete freedom. You may choose and place any number of these stations in your factory as long as you follow these placement rules. First of all, obviously the tile must be available in the display. If there is any conflict about the last remaining tile in the stack, again, as I said, the player with a higher engineering focus has the priority. Then, whenever you place a new tile in your factory, it must be either adjacent directly to this loading bay area or to any other tile previously placed. And by the way, you may never move those tiles that have been placed previously. The tiles are adjacent if they touch on at least one side of one of these squares of the grid. So touching with the corners doesn't qualify as being adjacent. Then the tile must fully fit in the factory. You may never place a tile, for example, like this. However, later in the game, when you place more floor tiles in your factory, you may place a new tile in such a way that it is placed over multiple floor plan tiles. Then you may never cover any part of this loading bay area, and you may also never overlap any of the previously placed tiles, like this for example. And finally, although this may be quite obvious, you must always align the new tile with this grid on the floor plan tile. Then there are some specific rules for certain combination of tiles. This tile is called the main line, and it determines which type of the car you can produce. These are called normal cars, these are sports cars, and these are trucks. Note that these tiles are double-sided, and let me show you the other side for the comparison. So as you can see, the relative position of these letters are different, so you can choose whichever side is best for you and for your factory layout. Then these tiles are called dealership tiles. These dealerships allow you to sell the cars, and each dealership must be adjacent to at least one main line, and vice versa, each main line must be adjacent to at least one dealership. Then these are marketing departments. They must always be adjacent to the dealership. You can have more than one marketing department adjacent to the same dealership. For these research departments and the planning department, there are no specific requirements. So we have the main line, we have the dealership and the marketing department, and it's time to add technology stations which upgrade the components of your cars. So in order to place these technology stations in your factory, you must have access to that technology. You always have access to the technologies you have researched already. So for example, the red player has access to this technology, this one, and also this one. But you may also gain access to the technologies of other players. That is determined by this track, again, and by the engineering focus. Let me shift these markers a little bit down, because the player in the first position has access to all technologies researched by any player. In other words, this player has access to any technology which has been researched by at least one player in the game. So, for example, since this technology has been researched by at least one player, purple player has an access to this technology. Then the player in the second position on this engineering track has an access to all technologies researched by at least two players. So, for example, in the safety area, Since brakes have been invented by at least 2 players, green player also has an access to this technology. And in this case, this technology has not been researched by 2 players yet, but it was researched by the green player, which means the green player obviously has an access to that technology. So when you place the technology station, it must always be adjacent or connected to the main line, and it must be connected or adjacent to the area with the same letter. Those letters represent various manufacturing steps. The other option is to place the technology station so that it is adjacent to another station which is connected to that manufacturing main line. You may never have 2 tiles of the same type, of the same technology, linked or connected to the same main line. You may have more copies of the same technology station, but they must be connected to different main lines. Then each technology station must have a specification indicator attached. Specification indicators are these small markers which indicate the research area of your technology. Here we have the red area, the speed, and the background or hatchings on those indicators match the background of those technology stations. You can only place that indicator in your factory if you have an access to that technology at the moment, and that indicator must be adjacent to the technology tile in your factory. You can imagine that this is the manufacturing line and this is some technology expert able to set up and maintain that manufacturing line. Each technology station must have at least one specification indicator attached. However, in this example, the engine has 3 numbers here, red 1, green 1 and blue 5. These letters represent different types of upgrades to that engine, and this red number 1 indicates that this engine upgrade is in the first position of this speed research track. The second engine upgrade is again in the first position of this range research track, which means your engine has now better fuel consumption and you can go longer distances. And the last engine related upgrade is on the reliability research track on the 5th position, which means your engine will have fewer failures. At the moment, the red player may also add this green specification indicator for the engine upgrade. So again, this indicator must be adjacent to the engine technology station. And the same also applies to these brakes, so the red player can place this specification indicator. And again, it must be adjacent and pointing towards the brakes technology station. So thematically, when you produce these cars, they have now upgraded engine in both of these areas, the speed and range, and those cars also have brakes, which is a strange statement, but the first cars really didn't have brakes. Now, let's say, for example, that due to the player order, the red player would have access to this technology at the moment, which means you may place this technology station in your factory together with the specification indicator. Later in the game, if the red player loses access to that technology, it doesn't affect your factory, so whatever you have already placed in the factory is there and you can use it. And one last note, when you have the technology station in your factory already, but you don't have all those specification indicators yet, when you finally reach the required level, you may add the corresponding specification indicator as well. And as a side note, these specification indicators also count as the regular factory tiles. So when you place the technology tile in the factory, you may connect that technology tile to the main line through these specification indicators. Then at the end of the phase, when you are finished building your factory or expanding your factory, move your brand marker down to the bottom line of this track. And remember, there are 6 floor expansion tiles prepared for each player, so take one of those tiles and place it adjacent to your factory tile. You can place it any way you want, there is only one restriction. These white hatchings are keep clear zones, which means nothing can be adjacent to this area. So, for example, you would not be able to place the expansion tile like this, because this keep clear area, the white hatching area, is adjacent to something, so it is blocked. And with placing this expansion tile, your phase of building the factory is over. That means that in the first round of the game, you can only build the factory on your starting factory tile. In the second round of the game, you will be able to use one expansion tile. So your space is limited. So be very careful when placing new tiles in the factory. The fourth phase is just an administration phase when these dealerships will summarize the specifications of their respective mainlines and publish these specifications as the sales brochures. All players can do this simultaneously, but as the first step, sum up the number of your planning departments in your factory. In this case there's only one. And for each planning department, increase the number of your planning points by 1. If any player reaches this space with the punch clock icon, move the time card marker one step down. Now determine these specifications for each main line and for each dealership. So count the number of these specification indicators that are connected to that particular main line. Here we have 2 green indicators and 1 red, 1 yellow. For each indicator, place a colored cube of the same color on that dealership. If there is more than one main line connected to one dealership, the specification for that dealership is set to the lowest specifications of those main lines. So, as we have already seen, this main line has these specifications, 2 green, 1 red and 1 yellow, and this one has 1 yellow and it has 1 green coming from this area. Now, the lowest specification is obviously here, so this dealership will only have these 2 cubes. These better specifications would be wasted this round. Now, determine the market stretch for each dealer. That depends on number of these marketing departments adjacent to each dealer. If there is no marketing department adjacent, the dealer is considered to be a small dealer, so take this small marketing window. Take the window with the same name as the dealer. If there is one marketing department adjacent to that dealer, the dealer is considered to be medium, so place this medium market window next to your player board. And if you have 2 marketing departments adjacent to the dealer, the market stretch of that dealer is large and you would place this market window next to your player board. One last note, in order to sell, each dealer must meet at least the minimum specification requirements. Those are determined by these white wooden tokens. At the start of the game, those minimum requirements for all dimensions, for all areas, are 0 because those wooden tokens are between the starting space and the first technology station on each research track. If, for example, this token would be placed here, that means that for the safety area, safety dimension, the minimum specification requirement is 1. That will be also indicated by the token on the main board. I'm going to explain how these minimum requirements change in phase 7. So for now, suffice to say that if your dealer doesn't meet these minimum requirements, such a dealer would not be allowed to sell any car at all. In this example, we have 1 yellow upgrade, so this dealer fulfills those minimum requirements. However, if this wasn't here and the dealer wouldn't have this yellow cube, that dealer would not be able to sell any cars at all this round. In 5th phase, players will sell to the customers on the market. In this phase, players take turns, starting with the player with the highest sales focus, so in this example, the red player, then the green, then the purple, and then again red, green, purple, and so on. And you will continue like this until all players run out of all their sales opportunities. So on your turn, you have to activate one of your dealers, and if you haven't placed the market window of that dealer yet, take that market window and place it anywhere on the market board. You can place it in such a way that it overlaps market boards of other players. You can place it so that it sticks outside of the market board, so really you can place it any way you want. However, keep in mind that you can only sell cars to the customers in your current market window, and you have to meet the minimum requirements. Those are determined by these axes, both the horizontal and the vertical, and these squares indicate how many cubes of the corresponding color your dealer must have. Those specification requirements are these cubes on your dealership tile. So this box in the bottom left corner has no requirements at the moment, which means your dealer doesn't need to have any range or speed upgrades. On the contrary, customers that will be located in this area would require at least 3 cubes of the red color in this case and 3 cubes of the green color from any dealer attempting to sell the cars in this area. So thematically, these are the most demanding customers. These are the customers with the lowest requirements. So after you place your market window, then you have to choose one of the squares, one of the smaller squares in that window, and sell all the cars to all the customers in that square. So for example, let's take this one. This is one customer willing to buy one normal car. You can take the car and place it on your main line, indicated that this main line already produced and sold one car. And for selling the car, you gain the price indicated in that price segment. So here we have $6. So update your wealth on this wealth accumulation track. If you sell the track, you get $1 additional, so that will be 7. For sports cars, you gain $2 more, so that will be 8 in this case. From each main line, you can only sell as many cars as your current assembly capacity. So in this case, this main line can still sell 1 additional car. So after the turn order comes back to the red player, if there is any normal car in the current market window for that dealer, you may sell that car, gain money, and again place the car on the main line. When you choose the square, you have to sell as many cars in that square as possible. So again, let's say the red player has the capacity of 2 cars and the current dealer and main line have not sold anything yet. The red player would have to sell 2 cars in this case, obviously gaining $12, and place those cars on the main line. If you have more than one dealer, you can, for example, on your first turn, place first market window, sell in that market window, then on your subsequent turn, you can place the market window of the second dealer and sell there. Then again on your subsequent turn, if you still have capacity available, you can come back to the first dealer and continue selling with that dealer and so on. Then at the end of the sell phase, remove all the market windows from the game board, and you can also remove these price point tokens, but keep all the unsold cars in their respective squares. In phase 6, check if the game is over. If this time card marker reaches 0, so when it is in the first space and you have to move it 1 space forward, flip it to the other side. On this finish side, the game will end now in phase 6 and only in phase 6. Or if this is round 7, which means all 6 of your extension boards are already on the table, so in phase 3 of the current round, you were not able to take another extension board, the game also ends now. In that case, the player with the highest wealth wins the game. If the game has not finished yet, proceed to phase 7, in which these customer expectations will change. Take the research track, which is next to this obsolescence marker, and place it under the research tracks which are placed off board. Then place this obsolescence marker next to the other research track next to the game board. Remove the corresponding specification axis and increase the minimum specification requirements on the removed research track by 1. You can also place this minimum requirements token on the corresponding space on the game board. Or later in the game, you may flip it to the other side if the minimum requirements would be 2. Now look at the remaining research tracks, excluding the one you have just removed from the game board, and identify the one with the most innovation. Each research marker ahead of this minimum requirements token is worth 1 innovation. So on this safety track, we have 1, 2 innovations. You count 1 innovation for each space for each marker. So on this design research track, there are also 2 innovation points because this marker is 2 spaces away from the minimum requirements token. So take the research track with the most innovation and place it on the empty space next to the market board. In case of a tie, like in this case, take the topmost research track. Then place that track next to the market board under the corresponding axis. Place the corresponding specification axis next to that axis. If the new dimension has the minimum requirements 0, then the first area will have 0 dots, then 1, 2, 3. If that dimension would already have the minimum requirements 1, this 1 would be in this first segment, then 2, 3, and 4, and in case the minimum requirements would start at 2, the first column should also read 2 squares, so flip the axis tile and then place the small one with the 5 cubes to the last column. So next round you would remove this research track and replace it with one of these 3 research tracks based on the innovation points. And finally, in phase 8, players will choose one of their cards and influence the market. First, starting with the player with the highest engineering focus and then continuing to the player with the lowest engineering focus. Each player will choose one of their cards and the number on the card indicates the round in which you can play the card at earliest. So in other words, you can only play the card with the number if you have that many expansion tiles on the board in front of you. And place the chosen card in any of these 4 large quadrants on the market board. Each quadrant is marked with this number 1, 2, 3 and this is 4. Then flip all the cards face up. For each punch clock icon, move the time card marker 1 step down, and then in each quadrant place these spark tokens in the corresponding spaces based on those cards. These sparks will then generate buyers. So each spark token now generates 1 buyer of the corresponding type. Those spark tokens remain on the market board for the remainder of the game. So later in the game it may happen that you have more spark tokens in the same space. In that case you may flip the token to the other side showing 2 cars to save some space, which means this particular spark token would generate 2 new buyers. However, each space has a limit, and that limit is twice the number of cars on the sparks tokens. So in this example, this space would have a limit of 4 cars, this one would have a limit of 2 cars. So next round, if no player would sell any cars to these buyers, you would still add 1 new car to this space, but you may not add 2 new cars to this space. You can only add 1 because the limit is 4. Then after you resolve these cards from players, you remove them from the game. Take all these neutral cards, shuffle them and randomly draw 1 card for quadrant number 3, 1 card for quadrant number 2, and then draw a number of cards equal to the number of players minus 2. So in a 3-player game it's just 1 card. And those cards will be assigned to quadrant 1. These neutral cards generate buyers directly, they don't generate spark tokens, and they are also not affected by the limit on those squares, so they can even exceed that limit. When you're done, again, take all these neutral cards, shuffle them and place them somewhere nearby. Finally, as the very last step, you will place these price tokens. There are 4 segments of customers on the market. This is the first one, then this is the second one, third and the fourth. These are the most demanding and these are the least demanding customers. The highest segment, which contains any customers, will get this $6 price point. Then the next segment will get the $4 price point and so on. You always skip any empty segments, so in this example, this top segment would get the $6 price point marker. Then the next one is skipped, this one would receive $4 prize point, and the last one would receive $3. And that's the end of phase 8, and you can proceed to the next round next year with the phase 1. So that's how you play Horseless Carriage. If you have any questions or comments, I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. If you like the series, please subscribe. You can even support the channel on the Patreon page or clicking the thank you button under the video. You've been watching Game in a Nutshell. My name is Branislav Berec and hope to see you next time. I would like to thank everyone who has ever supported the channel, and especially the current supporters listed on this page. If you too would like to support the channel in creation of videos like this and other video tutorials and other content on this channel, please visit the patreon.com/Nithrania.